I'm just going to be sharing my screen. Okay. I'm just sharing the whole screen. If you don't see my screen, please do let me know. Hopefully, you should be in a position to see my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay, fantastic. Now, I'm just going to be starting up with the security fundamentals. Before we start understanding the products, architecture, and configurations, we should know that why we are using these products. Only then it would be helpful for you whenever a requirement is pitching in. You should be in a position to understand what can be done to address that issue. Like a new requirement is coming up, how you address it. So most of the time I'll be expecting my participant, my students, to be acting like a solution architect, not just having certain commands to be executed or something like that. So if something coming up to configure, you should be in a position to visualize what is happening in your network by configuring this kind of an activity. What is that going to be achieved? In that way, even before you start the activity, if any issues are there, you will be able to identify them and you can notify it. Whether they are taking it up or not, it doesn't matter. Okay, so you should be in a position to understand, explain the problem to the to the owner of the project or to your higher official, so that it will be, you will also be getting a lot of repetitions on that. So you visualize it. To visualize it, you should have the complete understanding on the infrastructure and technology. Working on the product is not going to be taking a lot of time. You can easily understand the product and technology, but the thing is, if something goes wrong, you should know where you have to go and find the issue, how to isolate the problem, and how do you provide a solution for that. This is the ultimate goal of us. Okay, to start with, now why do we have to secure our infrastructure? Okay, security fundamentals is what the topic we are getting into now. See, nowadays all of the informations have been stored in the format of digital, right? You take anything, your medical data, your medical information is in the digital format, your currency is in digital format, your banking transactions in digital format. You take anything, everything has been digitized. So, even your personal information, PII, right? So, personally identifiable information, those are also available as part of digital world. Now, if because all this data has been digitized, it is easy for us to access the data also. It doesn't matter whether you are sitting inside an office or outside the office. It doesn't matter. Yep. Yep. Yes, I'm doing it. Yes, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Am I audible? Okay. Okay. Okay then. Yeah. So now we know that all the data, I mean, so all the set of information, everything is being digitized. The purpose of digitization is what? Ease of access to the stored data. Now the data is going to be stored in different format, could be in a database or could also be in a flat file system. It doesn't matter for us now. Okay. Now, the moment the data has been, whatever the information needs to be digitized, it has been digitized, we can easily access the data from anywhere. Even you could be having access or you could be accessing the data from internal network or external network. It doesn't matter. Same way, you may also be allowing the people to access the data from any sort of device. The users might be accessing the data using their laptop or their PC or their tablet or their mobile phone, even using their TV also they could access. Means, as long as any of the device is connected to the network and any of the device have reachability to the data, they should be allowed to access it, right? So that is the reason of digitizing all the set of information. Now, at the same time, it is also going to be, it leads to a different kind of an issue. What is that? It is not that any data could be accessible to anyone. So there might be some there might be some proprietary information, there might be some data that is not going to be shared with the rest of the world. Then we have to make sure that that data should not be accessible. The moment the data is part of the network, whomever is connected to the network, they should have the reachability. They could have the reachability, but the problem is we have to start protecting the data by approving the access only to the legitimate users. Am I right or not? So this is the fundamental idea of digitizing the data. Once the data has been digitized, people whomever is connected to the network, they can access it, and we wanted to protect it by approving only the legitimate users in accessing the data. This is what we want. But unfortunately, we cannot expect this. We cannot expect that the data is going to be accessed only by the legitimate users. Even if the data is going to be accessed by the legitimate users, it is quite possible that unknowingly they could be the reason for launching some sort of threats. Right? Hello? Was there a question? I hear some noise. I'm not sure. Was there a question? Okay. Hello? Again, I'm hearing a noise. Okay. Right. So, because the data is accessible through the network, it is quite possible that every owner of the data could be feared of some sort of threats. See, why we are taking a locker in bank to safeguard our valuable items into it, because we are feared of it. Feared of what? Some sort of attack could happen, right? So that's what we are calling it as a threat. Depending on from where the threat is being initialized, the threats are classified into four: unstructured, structured, internal, and external. Depending on the origin from where the threat is being initialized, it could be from authorized user, it could be from unauthorized user. The attack could be initiated from your internal network, or the attack could be initiated from external network, or the attack could be coming from a professional attacker or a novice user. It could be anything. So based on that, the threats have been categorized into four, what is called unstructured threats, structured threats, internal threats, and external threats. The moment I say unstructured threats, do you remember anything? Like you heard about these terms, right? I hope you guys heard about these terms. Am I right? No? Oh, okay. Okay. Fine. See, unstructured threats are coming from a user who doesn't have any idea about how an attack has to be launched. If that is the case, how a threat could be initialized, or how a threat can be originating from him? So just because he heard about couple of tools, just because he came across some of the tools on the internet, or some of his friends have been talking about a couple of tools. Okay, do you remember any tool that you have used during your college to bypass your college security system to access the protected websites? Do you remember anything? Proxy. Okay, basically what it does. I'm so. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyway, access to the proxy should also be protected, right? That we are doing it now. See, basically, what we are trying to do is we were taking the help of some of the tools. Like one of the popular tool I have seen on the college life is u.exe, ultrasurf.exe. All you have to do is, if that file is with you, just double click the file, a browser gets opened up. Using that browser, if you access it, most of the protected or filtered URLs can be accessible through it. Basically, it is an anonymizer. That's what we used to say, that one. And of course, there is also another tool called as a Tor, right? Probably you might have heard about this tool called as the Onion router. It is also a network of proxies. All you have to do is, if you have that package with you, all you double click that, you get opened up with a browser. Using that browser, you can get access to all of the filtered traffic. Now, the point is what? I'm using the Tor, I'm using the ultrasurf.exe, but I don't have any idea how it works. I have been told that if I use this tool, I can bypass the college network, the college network security. So whatever the security got implemented in the college, I can easily bypass through the help of this anonymizers, or either through the help of this ultrasurf, or through the help of this Tor. You understand? So what happens here, without having any idea about how this tool works and how the network has been secured, we are bypassing it. I'm a novice user. I don't know what I want. I don't know where my data resides, or I don't know where my victim is. I don't know how to compromise the network. I don't know how an operating system works. I don't have any idea about what I want and how do I get it. Just because I have been told by a couple of my friends or colleagues, I'm just started using those tools. Because of that, I'm achieving something, right? So unstructured threats are coming from a novice user. Most often in security industry, we used to call him as a script kiddie. What do you mean by script kiddie? Script kiddie means he's like now we have the programs like White Hat Juniors and all, right? So you are registering for a training program. So it is basically meant for the kids. They'll be able to understand the logic behind developing a software and all. So we are kids. We don't know how to write a script. What is the purpose of a script? How do you launch the script? How do you embed the code? We don't have any idea about it. You're getting my point, right? So unstructured threats are coming from script kiddies. Unfortunately, if they don't have any idea about the tool what they are using, they might be downloading this tool from an infected website or infected site. Because of that, they might be the victim also, right? So unstructured threats are coming from a novice user, whereas in contrast, structured threats are coming from professional hackers, right? They know what they want, they know where it resides, they know how to get into the target network, they also know how to compromise, and they also know how to achieve what they want on the target machine. Probably their intention could be stealing the data or destroying the service. It could be anything. So they know how to achieve it. Most importantly, they are very proficient in clearing all of the evidences. See, when they log in, there will be an event. When they are doing some activity, there will be some log is going to be generated. They make sure that no traces of their access on the target network. They will try to do that one. So professional hackers are called as, often they are also known as what? Black hat. Probably this term you might be heard about. Am I right? Black hat, white hat. Now probably White Hat Junior is what I was trying to explain. Black hat and white hat, they're all professionals, but their intention is different. They know both of them will be using the same set of logics, both of them will be using the same set of tools, and they also know how to customize the tool according to their requirement. But their intention is different. Black hat, 100%, their intention is malicious, whereas white hat, their intention is legitimate. What do you mean by legitimate? Okay. Now, how do you define certified ethical hacking? CEH program is there, na? Can hacking be ethical? How? Mm. Okay. Um, okay. So I would say that is still hacking only. That is used to trace the criminals. Okay. Now, when I say that white hat or hacking can be ethical, it is used to identify the loopholes in your environment. Basically, white hat people are helping the organizations to betterment their security. They will evaluate the current security level of an organization. They will also help the organization to enhance it so that black hat couldn't be succeeding while they are launching an attack. That's the logic behind it. But what you're saying is, I agree that, but to certain extent, the example what you have given could be used to trace the criminals. That is cyber forensics kind of a thing. We can say like this. That's a forensic thing. You wanted to collect the evidences, right? So that's where that cyber forensics comes into picture. Anyway, so black hats, intention of that black hat people is 100% malicious, whereas white hat people's intention is 100% legitimate. And they also have something called as gray hat. Partially they are legitimate, partially they are malicious. How come you can say that? See, I normally give an example for this. Assume that you are driving your vehicle on the road and you are seeing that one of your close friend is fighting with someone. Now, without doing anything, if he is your close friend, you know everything about him, and you are very closely relating with him, then obviously you will park your vehicle and you will blindly start supporting your friend. No, of course, even me also do the same thing, right? So after all the discussion, or whatever you call it as, once the problem has been solved, then we start asking our friend, what happened, why you were fighting with him, without knowing anything, without knowing any background of the issue. We started blindly supporting our friend just to make sure that our friend wouldn't be doing anything wrong. We believe that one, right? Probably the mistake could be on our friend side. You understand? So by that time we were not standing on you understand what I'm trying to say here. See, that is where the gray hat people comes into picture. They will be partially legitimate, right? So it purely based on who is hiring them. So they might be hiring this guy to cause some damage on the network. By that time, his intention is malicious. Same way, somebody might be hiring him to safeguard their network. By that time, he is acting as a white hat. So gray hats, we cannot trust them because we don't know when he will be malicious and when he will be legitimate. At least we can say that black hats are always malicious, whereas white hats are always legitimate. We can start trusting them, whereas the gray hat people, it's very difficult to trust them. Okay, we also have high profiled structured threat coming from high profiled people. We call them as elites, right? We also call them as cyber world dons. They normally blackmail people. Okay, so unstructured threat and structured threat, we know the meaning of it now. Am I right? Unstructured threats are coming from a novice user. Okay, structured threats are coming from professional attackers. Okay. Now, what is internal threats and external threats? Internal threats are originating from an authorized user. I'm not saying that the internal threats are originating from internal to the network. The meaning of internal threat is, if the threat is being originated from a user who have authorized access to the data, then we call it as an internal threat. Same way, if the threat is coming from an unauthorized user, then it is called as external threat. Again, internal threat can be unstructured or structured. External threats can also be structured or unstructured. Is that clear? Believe it or not, more than 60% of the threats are internal. I'm not saying that all of them are intentional. Probably they might be compromised, their PC might be compromised, they might not be aware of it. See, you people belong to network, you people belong to security. You know what is happening on your machine. If something is suspicious, then you will be in a position to scan and identify what is the problem on your machine. Think about a receptionist who will also be given with a PC. If some attack launched, some attacks have been targeting that receptionist machine, and that machine has been compromised, she might not be in a position to track down what is the actual problem on it. They might access some of the data from there. So we normally call this as what a trust exploitation. So one of the PC inside the network has been compromised. Using that PC's trust, the whole network can also be compromised. So we need to make sure that when you're applying the security, it should be across your network, not one department. Okay. So internal threat could be threats could also be structured or unstructured. External threats could also be structured or unstructured. That's the point I'm just trying to make it. Okay. Now the point is, the threats, we know that this is the category of threats, but what is that? Actually speaking, what is the threat? The attackers could be launching an attack. From where it is being initiated, we have categorized it. Now, depending on the impact of the threat, or depending on the impact of the attack, we categorize them into multiple, like reconnaissance, access, DOS. We also have virus, worms, and trojans as well. As we start talking about the next generation firewalls, we should also be in a position to categorize them as a different category, right? So reconnaissance, access, and DOS. What is this? Reconnaissance means, in plain English, gathering information. So reconnaissance attacks are the attacks with which the attackers would be in a position to gather information as much as possible about the target network or the target machine or the target application. So basically, reconnaissance is nothing but information collection. It is not an attack altogether. For example, If I'm pinging system, if I'm trying to ping a system, I'm getting the reply. Is that an attack? I'm pinging a web server. I may be getting the reply or I may not be getting the reply. It doesn't matter for me. Is that an attack? Okay, what? I'm sorry? Exactly. That's the point we are trying to get into. See, and this is the main reason ICMP has been blocked by most of the firewalls in the industry by default. So the ICMP is not going to be allowed to pass through your security device. Why? Because ICMP may lead to information gathering. Okay. So informations are going to be collected during the reconnaissance phase. With that collected information, attacker may lead to the next stage, which is called as an access attack or DOS attack. What I mean to say, access attack is nothing but the attacker is trying to steal that information. He is not trying to destroy it. Okay. Whereas DOS attack, the attacker is trying to destroy the services or the data, whatever it is. So access attack is nothing but the data, an unauthorized access is going to be there for it. So I have some data, that data could be stolen or could be accessed by an unauthorized user. That's where the access attack comes into picture. Whereas the DOS attack, denial of services, as the name says that, the services or the data is going to be destroyed so that when a legitimate user is trying to access the data or service, it wouldn't be available for him. That's where the DOS attack comes into picture. Further, the access attacks have been categorized into three: unauthorized data access, unauthorized system access, unauthorized privilege escalation. You probably heard about these terminologies on your security fundamentals. Probably, I'm not sure, but if you have undergone any of the training, you would have heard about this. Unauthorized data access, for example, as an employee of your organization, you might be having access to some portion of data, but you're trying to launch an attack. You're trying to gain access to the portion of the data for which you don't have access to it. That's where unauthorized data access comes into picture. Okay. Whereas unauthorized system access don't take system as a PC, system as a service. Probably think about your intranet portal. So do you have the complete access to your intranet portal? I'm not sure. I'm just asking you. Your existing company or the company to which you are going to be joining. I'm not very sure about. Once you join to the company, you'll know about it. Just take the example of your current company. You will be having an intranet portal, right? Do you have complete access to that intranet portal? Okay, you might belong to the networking team. There might be a team who will be taking care of HR. There might be a team called finance. There might be a team called as project. There will be different teams, right? As you part of the networking team, you might have a limited access to the intranet portal. Same way, finance team will have certain portion of the service. So what I mean to say that as you are trying to launch an attack, you are trying to gain access to the service for which you don't have access to it. If it is internal, external, you don't have any access to the service, but you are trying to launch an attack to gain the access to the service. So what I mean to say, unauthorized system access, an attack is being launched to gain access to a service for which you don't have authorization. That's where the unauthorized system access comes into picture. The third one is called as unauthorized privilege escalation. So what is that privilege escalation? Okay, now you guys have given with a PC from your organization, right? So you might be having a laptop or you might be having a desktop. Are you an administrator for that PC or laptop? Some of them might be, some of them might not. Correct? Now, what is the purpose of talking about administrative privileges on the machine? So that you will be able to launch, you will be able to install a piece, install an application, or you will also be able to customize the configurations on it. For example, if you would like to change the IP address of the machine, if you are not having enough rights, you will not be able to do it. So what we are trying to do is, we are escalating the privileges so that, means when I say escalating the privileges, unauthorized. I'm not saying that I can call my administrator and ask him to escalate my privilege, make myself as a super user. It's not going to be happening. Depending on the role that you have within your organization, the privileges are going to be assigned. So by escalating that privileges on without giving any sort of without taking any sort of approval from the organization, or without giving any sort of information to the organization, you will be able to achieve something else. That's where unauthorized privilege escalation comes into picture. Okay, so access attack further classified into three. What are all they? Unauthorized data access, unauthorized system access, unauthorized privilege escalation. Okay, DOS attack, denial of services. Can you please name any one of the denial of service attacks that you are familiar with? Sorry? No, I'm hearing both the voices. Oh, okay, okay. Now, how that works? SYN flood attack. Okay, okay, okay. Then how? Okay, okay, okay. Now, see, the client is going to be sending a SYN packet. The server has to respond back. The client might be sending hundreds of SYN packets or thousands of SYN packets. My question is how this leads to, technically, how this leads to a DOS attack. Okay. But instead of that, instead of sending the SYN packet, even the client can send volume of traffic to the server to achieve the DOS attack. Am I right? Okay. Right. See, if I'm going to be sending a volume of packet, obviously it may not lead to a DOS attack, because the packets are non-relevant to the server. If those packets are part of an existing connection, by sending a volume of traffic, yes, you could achieve the DOS attack. But anyway, that purely depends on the capacity of the server and how this volume of traffic is going to be handled. But SYN flood is going to be a little bit different. When I'm sending a SYN packet, the server has to respond. Before it responds, what is that needs to be checked? First of all, as a server, I receive a SYN packet. I have to confirm that the service is running on me or not. For example, if TCP/80 web service is running on me, if somebody is sending a SYN packet to web service, then obviously I have to respond back. How come? Because that service is running on me. Before I reply back, I have to confirm that the service is well and good. It can handle a new connection. At the same time, before I send a SYN-ACK packet to the client, I need to make sure that do I have enough resource to handle a new connection. See, when we are sizing a server, we are talking about the resources like a processor, like memory, like storage, like the application. We are sizing the server, right? Based on the server resources only, the number of connections, concurrent connections that can handle by the server is going to be decided. I'm just taking an example. Let's assume that a server is capable of handling 100 connections. This is very simple. Even a PC can also handle 100 connections. Just for an example, I'm saying that. When the server is receiving a SYN packet, it understands that somebody is trying to open up a connection with me. Then the server has to check whether that service is running on me or not. Yes, the service is running. Then I have to check, do I have enough resources to handle a new connection or not? Okay, I have resources to handle 100 connections. Okay, now what I do is I have to allocate the resources for this new connection. Only then I'll be able to send the SYN-ACK packet. Now, if you check the available resource, the resource is available for handling 99 more connections, not 100 connections, because one of the connection, the resource has been allocated for it. Am I right? Now what happens, the client is keep on sending the SYN packet so that all the resources on the server is being totally utilized. Because of that, any more new connections cannot be accepted by the server. Now what is this? How come this can be leading to a DOS attack? I don't have enough resources. By this time, if any of the legitimate user is trying to open up a connection with the server, because the server doesn't have resources to handle a new connection, he will not be in a position to reply back with the SYN ACK to the legitimate client, and this is what we are calling it as DOS. Am I right? Is there any clarification is required on this? Okay. Now this is called as a SYN flood attack. Now the problem is, because the SYN packets are continuously coming from the same client on the server, if you go for analysis, you can easily identify from where the SYN flood attack has been initiated. We can track that down. That's why attackers came up with something called as a DDoS. What is the DDoS? Distributed denial of services. What do you mean by that? Distributed denial of services. Anything? How that is possible? Good. So that is one of the way we can do it, or else simply I can construct a packet with a different source IP address. It's quite possible, right? So what happens is, when I'm sending the packet, the SYN packet, I can say that it is coming from Mahesh, it is coming from Ranita, it is coming from Robin, it is coming from Prashant. It could be anything. When I'm saying that I'm sending a SYN packet, I say that this packet is coming from Prashant. The server receives the packet, it sees the packet as it is coming from Prashant. So the server will try to reply back with the SYN ACK packet to Prashant. Now Prashant will be asking, who are you? Why are you sending SYN ACK? He will simply drop the packet. But from server's perspective, he received a SYN, he has sent a SYN ACK packet to the client. He is waiting for the ACK packet to establish a connection, but Prashant will not send ACK packet. Right? Now, what is the status of the connection on the server side? What would be the status? How do we call it as? No. We have certain terminologies for this, right? See, once the connection has been established, we call it as established. Once the three-way handshake has been done, we call the status of the connection as established. Now, the server has received a SYN and he has sent the SYN ACK back to the Prashant. Okay. Now, the point is, what would be the current status of that connection on server? How do you call it as? Because you guys are coming from Cisco, no? That's why I'm just telling you. Sorry? Nope. It's not called as two-way state. Okay, so in standard terminology is a half open. The connection is a half open. Half the way the connection is opened. Once I receive an ACK packet, then we can say that three-way handshake has been completed. The connection has been established. Okay. Now Cisco says this as embryonic connection. You would have seen this one on your log messages, I'm not sure, but this is the term used by Cisco. Embryonic means a half open connection. The established state is going to be considered as full from Cisco's perspective. That's the terminology they will be using it. Okay, fine. So by having this distributed denial of services, even some analysis, some forensic activities are going to be happening on the server side. Still they will not be able to, what is that called, identify that from which source the SYN packet, the SYN flood has been launched, the SYN packets have been received. This is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, as you people said, you can have the bots, or we normally call those bots as what, zombies. You can have the bots being installed on weak machines connected on the internet. So basically what happens, people who are connected to the internet, do you think that everyone is aware of what is internet and how it works? Obviously not. So what happens, they are trying to access some website. That website might be injecting some malicious codes on it. Those malicious codes have been developed by an attacker. If those codes have been launched against your machine, basically what happens is those machines are going to be under my control, or whatever I say, that machine can execute it. Assume that at a set like this, I can take control of variety of machines connected on the internet. At a set time, instead of me targeting the victim, I will pass on the information to the compromised machines, and they will send that what is that called, a half open connection or whatever you call it as, that attack is going to be initiated from those machines. Now, if the analysis is going to be happening, basically what happened, they will be able to identify from which are all the machines the SYN packet or the attack has been initiated, but originally it is coming from, it was initiated by me. I wouldn't be traced. You understand what I'm saying? So that's where distributed denial of service comes into picture. Now, virus, worms, and trojans. What is the difference between these three? So all of them are malwares, okay? Not these three are malwares. You have adwares, you have spywares, you have variety of malwares. Put together, all of them are called as malwares. Malwares is nothing but malicious software. Okay? Now, but in what way they are different? Virus, worms, and trojans. Anything? Am I audible? Okay. Oh. Oh, okay. I thought that when I asked, am I audible? You said no, I thought I'm not audible. Okay. Virus, worms, and trojans, all of them are malicious softwares only. But in what way they differ? Of course, their intention is to cause something, so it's going to be causing some sort of damage on the victim machines. But how? Virus, you need a body to attach it, like a parasite, right? It has to be attached with an application. You cannot send a virus directly to your machine because it can be easily detected. So, or how do you make sure that that software or the malicious software program is going to be downloaded on the machine? See, I would like to compromise your machine. Can I call you and say that, can you download this program and install in your machine so that I'll be able to cause some damage on your machine? No, it's not going to be happening. I need to understand that you are trying to download an application, or you're trying to create a greeting card, or this is your birthday, I'm sending you a greeting card, something like that. So somehow I have to make you to open an application or a file. So while I'm sending that application or a file, I'm going to be attaching or embedding this malicious software. How do you do that one? There are so many tools available, but if you are an attacker, you know how to do that one, right? So there is an application I'll tell you which is called as a Trojan binder. Basically, this binding tool help you to identify two different set of application. One will be your legitimate application. The second one is the malicious code. While you're binding it, you also have the option of saying that what should be visible and what should be hidden. So when I'm sending a greeting card to you, I will make sure that, I think somebody is trying to log in. I'm not sure. Jashwant. Hi, Jashwant. Hello, Jashwant, can you hear me? Okay, anyway, I'm not sure whether he's able to hear me or not. That's a different story. Okay, so you need a body to attach this malicious code. That's where we are talking about the greeting card and all. Now what basically happens, so when I'm sending you a greeting card, you see that as a greeting card, but actually speaking, on behind the scene, I have a malicious application embedded to it. So that's why we used to say that unless that greeting card or the application on which this malicious code is attached with, you open it, you will not be able to, means the virus is not going to be capable of causing that damage. You understand? See, if a malicious software is a virus, it is attached to a genuine application and it has been sent to you. As a user, you have to trigger it. You have to open it. Until you open that application, the malicious software cannot be triggered at all. This is what the virus is all about. Whereas the worms, right, when I'm sending that worm to you, probably I'll be sending, depending on the worm category, okay, there are so many types of worm, I can send it in a different medium. If that worm is sent to you, you no need to trigger that. The moment it got injected into your machine, automatically it gets activated. It will start doing something. For example, see, one of the popular, the purpose of worms is eating up all the resources available on your machine. See, those are all the types of worms. Again, there are certain worms, they can eat up the available bandwidth on the network. Basically, they will try to slow down the process of whatever the activity that you're doing it. Either it could be network based activity, or it could be a specific application running internally on your machine. That's where the worm. Virus requires user intervention, whereas worms doesn't. Whereas Trojans are going to be it's a kind of a two parts in that application. There will be server component, there will also be a client component. Basically, an attacker is going to be embedding the server component, and then it will be sent to you. Now, as a user, you download and execute the program. On behind the scene, that program, the malicious program, also got executed, and it will start listening to the instructions from the attacker. Attacker uses the client software to interact with the server component running on the server machine, on the victim machine. Basically, what the client can do is, it can pass on the instructions like, can you please search for all of the document files on the victim machine and send it to me in form of an email? You can do that. So the virus, worms, Trojans, all of them are malicious. Virus requires a user intervention, whereas worms doesn't require user intervention. Trojans are two pieces of software, server and client. Server will be installed on the victim machine. Client will be under the control of the attacker. Using the client, an attacker can communicate with the, the server component running on the victim machine. So one of such example, on the Trojan's part, you have something called keyloggers. Probably you heard about keyloggers, right? What keyloggers will do is, keyloggers are going to be capturing the keys pressed by the administrator that will be collected and stored in a file. Then it can be sent to the attacker. What happens if you're trying to access some application, for example, accessbank.com. So you type axisbank.com. Automatically these keystrokes are going to be collected. At the same time, after you press login and then you press your username and password, that is also going to be collected. So keyloggers are nothing but, basically it collects the keystrokes, it records the keystrokes used by any of the user on that machine. Then that is going to be stored in the form of a file, and then it will be sent to an attacker. This is a keylogger, it's a kind of a Trojan. Of course, we also have hardware keyloggers. See, certain PCs we will not be having direct access to the users, right? So that's where the hardware keyloggers will be there. If you wanted to use a hardware keylogger, you should have physical access to the system. Basically what happened, if you have a PC and you will be having an external keyboard, right? So what happens, between the PC and the keyboard, this component will be collected. You just search on the internet, you will come across what is a hardware keylogger, how it looks like. So you can have a hardware keylogger connecting to, one end will be connected to the keyboard and the other end will be connected to the CPU. So whatever it is being typed, all the keys are going to be stored in that hardware component. Then whomever connected that hardware keylogger, he can come in and he can unplug it. Then he can use that data being analyzed on his machine. It's quite possible. Think that as a pen drive. You just need to connect it to his machine and he can see the complete set of keystrokes used by any of the users who accessed that server using that keyboard. So that's where hardware keyloggers comes into picture. You're getting my point? Is there any questions as of now? Why do we have to know about all these things? Do we really worry about all these things? With respect to working on the firewall? Okay, now let me ask you a question. You guys are working on the firewalls, right? How the SYNFLOOD attack is going to be handled by the firewalls? What are all the mechanisms I have? What are all the technology or what are all the solutions I have? Anybody? Fantastic. Correct. So we normally call this as a min-max configurations, minimum and maximum configuration. When this SYNFLOOD attack is being identified and how long the packet needs to be dropped is min-max threshold, we used to say that. And we also have proxying as well. And so what happens, especially Cisco ASA, watch mode and monitor mode. We have two different modes, right, to handle this SYNFLOOD connections. Within that period of interval, how many connections are coming from the same source to be identified as a SYNFLOOD attack? If a SYN flood attack has been identified, how this has to be handled? Basically, we will drop it. One. Second one is we can also hairpin it. What we will do is, when a SYN packet has been received and after reaching the threshold, instead of sending the SYN packet to the server, on behalf of the server, the firewall itself will be sending a SYN ACK packet. If ACK packet is received from the client, then a new connection from the firewall to the server will be established and they will be tied together. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, wait. I'm just trying to open up my whiteboard. My whiteboard is visible, right? Now, this is what my firewall, okay? And this is where my server is. And somebody is trying to access from the internet. Assume that I have configured some sort of thresholds here to identify it is a SYN flood attack. I have asked the firewall to do proxy it. So this is going to be 10 connections per second, very small amount, but I'm just giving you an example from the same source. Now assume that I'm sending the SYN packet, 11th SYN packet. Since I have started monitoring, this is 11th SYN packet of that second. Instead of forwarding this SYN to the original server, what I do is, I will send the SYN ACK packet to him. Understand? Instead of the server, I will be sending it. Now, if the client is sending an ACK packet to it, then I will initiate a connection with the server by sending a SYN packet. This SYN is initiated by the firewall, not by the original client. Now the server will reply back with the ACK. I'll establish a connection. Now this connection and this connection are going to be pinned together. You understand what I'm saying? Oh, this is also a mechanism with which we will be able to protect or fight against the SYN flood attacks. Now when you min-max threshold, minimum maximum threshold. Is that clear? Okay, fine. I'm sorry, yeah, Anita. Okay, now what basically happens in flood attack? We are trying to eat up all the available resources on the server. How? When the client is sending a SYN packet, it goes to the server, right? Now the server has to confirm that the service is running on it. The second thing is, it should check whether I have enough resources to accept a new connection or not. Then it will send a SYN ACK packet. Assume the server's capacity is only to handle 100 connections. The client can send 100 SYN packets, right, without sending an ACK or with sending an ACK. That's a different story altogether. That's a different scenario altogether. But my point is, when the client is sending a SYN packet, how do you save the server resources? To fight against the SYN flood attack, the firewall can monitor certain things. Like if it reaches a threshold, that means within this period of time, I have received these many SYN packets for the server. Now I have to start protecting it because the server is not capable of handling those many connections. I believe that this could be a SYN flood attack. Based on that configuration, the firewall knows about it. After reaching the threshold, if a SYN packet is received, the firewall will not forward that SYN packet to the original server. Instead, on behalf of the server, let's take a different color so that I'll show you that. Okay. Now see here. Now the threshold has been reached. Now the client is sending a SYN packet. Instead of forwarding this SYN packet to the server, the firewall itself will be replying back. Right? Now if the firewall is replying back with SYN ACK, do you think that the server resources are going to be utilized for this connection? Ranita? The server resources will be utilized for this, handling this connection? How about the others? Am I audible? Now the client is sending a SYN packet. On behalf of the server, the firewall itself is sending a reply to the client, in this scenario, do you think the server resources are going to be utilized? Okay. Now we are safeguarding the resources of the server, correct? Assuming that it is a legitimate connection, the client may send back an ACK packet to establish a connection, correct? Now the firewall realizes that this is a legitimate connection. I have to allow the further request to be sent to the server. But how he can send it, because this connection is not actually responded by the server. Now the firewall will establish a new connection with the server. Now you have two connections, right? One from client to firewall, one from firewall to the server. Am I right? Now this is going to be pinned together so that it is going to be a seamless communication between the client and the server. Now assume that the client is not sending an ACK packet to establish a connection. The server resource is not being wasted. Is that clear? Okay. But this is where full open attacks comes into picture. What is that full open? Established state. See, this machine is a victim of an attacker. Okay, I am sitting here. Okay, I have compromised this machine. I can make this guy to send a SYN packet. After receiving the SYN ACK, he can also be allowed to send us ACK packet as well. In this case, this technique is not going to be helping. You understand what I'm saying? So we have to understand what type of attack is being launched and what are all the protective mechanisms available in my firewall to fight against it. Based on that, you have to fine tune it. That's the point I'm trying to make it here. SYN flood mitigation, which is called as a watch mode or monitor mode in firewall, ASA. Okay. Now, so you got the point, right? Why I'm explaining all this fundamental informations. Obviously, it will help you while you're talking about certain specific configuration parameters within your firewall. Okay, what type of attack it is. So now, why ICMP is not allowed by default on the firewall? Because it may lead to reconnaissance attack. Correct? Okay. Now, see, as a security professional, if a chance is given to you to fight against all these three types of attack, assuming that all three types of attacks are targeted against your network, which type of attack you will start fighting against first? Reconnaissance or access or DOS? Which one you will be fighting, or which one you consider as most dangerous? True, because if you can protect your reconnaissance, obviously access and DOS could be protected. Correct? Fine. Now, see, we have different security solution. Any questions as of now? Shall I move on to the next slide? Okay. See, basically we have these are all the types of attacks, and we are feared of these kind of threats, right? So we have to start protecting our infrastructure, protecting our data, whether it is residing in my office or in a different location altogether, doesn't matter. So what a security, by defining security, how do you define it? How do you define security from your perspective? There are so many definitions out there, but let me hear it from you guys. How do you define security? Anyone? Okay, that is one. Anything else? Because security, we have a lot of definitions for security. Everyone can come up with their own definitions also, and that's why I'm just trying to expect some kind of a responses from you. One response is what? Allowing only authorized users. Okay, fine. Anything else? Okay. Sorry, prevention? Okay. Now, when you say prevention, what sort of prevention? See, assume that this is my network. Okay, this is my network, and I have my public network connected, and this is where my firewall resides. Okay, let's assume like that. You have your data here, maybe in one of your office. Most of the time, we believe that the threats are coming from external world. Am I right? And we will do the inbound filtering. Inbound in the sense inbound to our network. Am I right? Is that true? Okay. Now, how do you define internet? Define internet. We call it as network of networks. Do you think anyone directly sitting on internet? Anyone is sitting on directly on internet? No. Everyone is connected to internet. Correct? Okay. Let me give a simple example. I have a switch. Multiple people connected through the switch. Now switch is compared with internet. Okay. The PCs are the networks. Now, if one of the PC is attacked, do you blame the switch or the other users? No, that means what? Switch is not having anything to do. Basically, internet provides connectivity. No attack can be originated from internet. It can be coming via internet. See, attackers make use of internet, right, to launch an attack. Attackers connected to internet, victims connected to internet. Because of that attack could be possible. But you cannot blame internet for an attack. Now, most of the organizations, they do inbound filtering considering that the threats or the attacks are coming from internet, but it is coming through internet, not from internet. What I mean to say, like, if you clean all the garbage from your home, right, you have to collect it in a container, and then you will be, where do you throw that garbage? You'll be throwing the garbage in the what is it called? In the bin, right? So you will be having a bin on every street, and you will go and put the garbage on the bin. Instead of that, collect all the garbage, stand in front of the house, throw it on the road. What will happen? Now the roads are going to be, you understand what I'm trying to say? The roads are not going to be clean. When strong wind comes, obviously that garbage, what you have thrown on the road, may come back to your house. Am I right? Now, what happens now? Instead of doing the inbound filtering, just on a statement, okay? If everyone starts doing the outbound filtering, then internet will be the safest place to play around. That means keep your roads clean to keep your homes clean. Am I right? Okay. Now, see, you cannot expect all of them to do this one. Okay. There are some malicious people as well. That's why we say that you do outbound filtering as well. What I mean to say, do the inbound filtering as well as outbound filtering. Whatever the traffic entering into your network needs to be strongly filtered. At the same time, the same level of importance needs to be given for outbound traffic filtering as well. Of course, nowadays many companies are doing it, but still, I just want to emphasize it. So, whatever the level of filtering that you are applying on the inbound traffic, the same level of filtering needs to be done on outbound traffic as well, so that internet can also be safeguarded. So, any attack initiated from your internal network cannot be allowed to pass through your infrastructure so that someone else can be saved. Same way, he could also do the outbound filtering, which is targeting your network, right? By filtering those kind of activities on their network itself, you are being saved. Of course, you cannot trust everyone's outbound filtering as well. That's why I wanted to protect my own infrastructure by doing the inbound filtering as well. So basically, the firewall or a security device is capable of doing the filtering on any direction. But our focus was on inbound. Now our focus is also on the outbound. Is that clear? That's what the point I'm trying to make it here. So security is nothing but filtering out the unwanted traffic. Either it could be coming from external to internal or from internal to external. We have variety of filtering techniques. Either you can use a firewall, you can use IDS IPS, you can also take the help of various other filtering techniques like antivirus, anti-spam, anti-bot, data loss prevention, URL, anything. You do any kind of a filtering technology, right? That is going to be positioned in your infrastructure to fight against. Yep. Even for me, your voice is breaking for me. I'm not sure. How about the others? Am I audible? Was there any? Probably this time it might be on your end. Probably, I'm not sure. If the rest of the people can hear me properly, then the problem is not on my side, I guess. Okay, can I repeat that? Can I repeat what I said? You want me to repeat it? I don't know whether I'm connected or not. Okay, thank you. So we have various filtering techniques. Now, can I have all of these filtering techniques at one device or at one place? Is that possible? You could, but would it be efficient? That purely depends on how you're doing it and what kind of filtering you are doing it and what is the capacity of the device and how much volume of traffic is being handled, and the application is okay for the total amount of delay, right? So you just need to worry about it. Like what? If you take any of the campuses, take any campus, any of the campus that you're working with, you will be having a security guard at entrance of your campus. Am I right? You have like a DLF or any kind of an IT park campus, or if you are living in an apartment community, it's a very large community, there will be a security guard at the entrance. Am I right? So basically, they will try to check who is entering into the campus. So that's where one type of filtering will be done. And then as you are entering into your office and multiple buildings are there, and one of the building where your office is there, you will try to enter that building. I think somebody is trying to log in now. Maybe. Who's that? Guru Charan. Yeah. He got disconnected, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Right, so what I'm trying to mean, so somebody is trying to enter into your campus, your office campus, there will be a security guard at entrance. They will confirm that whomever is entering into the campus belongs to or an employee of one of the company within that campus. That is the level of check they have to do it. If they are going to be checking everything from there, then there will be a long queue who needs to be permitted or who needs to be verified. Just a minute, once again, somebody is trying to enter into the meeting. Jashwant. Still people are waiting in the lobby. Yeah. Okay. Now, as the same employee or the user is trying to enter into the building where his office is placed, now there will be another security over there in the building. He will confirm, or some sort of validation. He is going to be confirming that you are working in one of the office in that building. That's what that security has to be done. Then you are entering into a floor and there will be a security guard. He will confirm that you are working in one of the office in that floor. Same way as you trying to enter into the office, there will be an access card, right? So there are various levels of check within your organization. You cannot expect the same device or the same set of filtering needs to be done at all the levels. At entrance, we will be very generic. At the building, we will be little bit granular. In the floor level, we will be more granular. In the office level, we will be more granular. You understand that? This is kind of a filtering needs to be done across your infrastructure to safeguard it. One of the things that we were talking about is the firewall. That is what the focus of our training here. Later on, you might be getting into a different product, like later we are talking about F5, right? So though it is not going to be a security device, there are certain security functions available on that device also. Okay, when we are getting into SD-WAN, though it is not a pure security device, there are certain security functionalities are there. So basically, security is going to be applied throughout your infrastructure on all of the devices to totally secure your infrastructure or the data. It is not that it is the responsibility of that guy. So every device, every technology within your infrastructure needs to take care of certain kind of security on its level so that the total security can be achieved. You understand what I'm saying? Shall I move on to next slide? Okay. So okay, good. So security, again, how do you safeguard it? As I said earlier, various levels of security needs to be applied. Okay, I'm using all the latest technology, security devices, high-end security devices, right? I'm using ultimate security technology and devices in my infrastructure. You cannot see all these technologies anywhere in the network or anywhere in the world. Can I say I'm secured? 100%? Right? So basically what happens, you are securing your infrastructure. It will help you to protect your infrastructure to certain extent. But the point is, but still unidentified loopholes, what we call them as vulnerabilities or unidentified exploiting techniques. See, vulnerabilities can be there. In each and every vulnerability can be exploited by tens and hundreds of methods. Okay, so we might be having the recent technologies in place, but it may not be sufficient to fight against the new type of attacks. Now think of like this. Nowadays, if you see the medical shops, right, the pharmaceutical shops, pharmacies, it looks like a supermarket. You would have traveled across the globe, you would have seen it. In many of the places, they have the logic of supermarket when you talk about a medical shop or a pharmacy. You go with the trolley, take all these medicines, and then you can come back and you can bill and come out of this pharmacy. You have this kind of pharmacies across the globe. My point is, when you have these much of medicines, are we not feared of any new diseases? Think about your corona. I'm not sure what is the status in your state. I'm just talking about from my state. So it was very severe. Now it is okay. Right? So now my point is, why don't we have medicine for all the diseases, current and future diseases? Is that possible? Without understanding the nature of new business or new viruses or new bacteria, whatever you call it, without knowing about how it works, how do you develop a medicine? The same way, when you have a complete security mechanisms applied in your infrastructure, still we cannot claim 100% secure, but it will help to fight against to certain level, or it can also help to reduce the damage of an attack. Like, what is the purpose of corona vaccination now? What medical industry says that it is not going to be preventing you from corona, right? Of course it will, but not 100%. But even after vaccination, if you are getting corona, the impact of that virus is not going to be as dangerous as without having that vaccination. This is what they are claiming. It's not that I'm supporting or not supporting corona. That's a different story altogether. But this is what the claim, right? So, first of all, to secure your infrastructure, try to implement the security mechanism, security technologies in place. Okay, can you please tell me what are all the ways the security can be achieved in an infrastructure? What you will start doing? Okay, this is the first network. This is the network. It's fresh. You have been given a chance, or you have been assigned to safeguard your infrastructure. What are all the security mechanisms you will be placing? Okay, DDoS, NAT, firewall. Okay. 1 minute, I'm just getting a call on this screen. Okay, firewall, IPS. Okay, so IPS is going to be second, right? That's what you were saying. Okay, so we have various security mechanisms. Okay, first thing I would say that device hardening. What is device hardening? You're getting the security updates, right? You're getting the patches. What is the purpose of it? Why do we have to update our operating systems? Okay, so that bugs may also lead to some sort of attacks, correct? So that's where the device hardening comes into picture. Updating your operating system or patching your operating system. That is one. The second thing is stop the unwanted services running on your machine. Okay. Yesterday also I told you about a command, right? Auto secure. I was talking about this auto secure. Okay. So when you are giving this command on your Cisco routers, it is going to be stopping all the unwanted services according to Cisco's recommendation. Like it will be stopping this small services of TCP and UDP. Why it is being done? Because if a service is running and it is not being used by your organization, probably you may not be having enough security measures to protect attack against that network. For example, you have an IIS services running, okay, a web service is running, but there is no website installed. Okay, if you don't have a web server, if you don't have a website hosted on it, do you think you will be placing the security mechanisms to protect against the IIS server? May not be. Now what happens if this service is not being used and it is running and no security mechanisms in place? Obviously this is going to be the target of an attacker. So please make sure that if a service is not being used, that is being properly stopped, so that like what is the mechanism that you use to safeguard the unused ports of a switch? You have multiple ports, right? So you have 48 ports or 28 port switch, out of which you are using only 20 ports. What you will do the rest of the ports? I'm sorry. Okay, port guard. Other than that, we have a concept called as black hole VLAN, right? We create a VLAN and we will keep all the interfaces, unused interfaces, into black hole VLAN, which will make sure that no access to any of the other VLANs from this black hole VLAN is going to be allowed. Not sure. People who might have gone through CCNP routing and switching, they might have heard about this term called as black hole VLAN. It's nothing but like what? What is management VLAN? Hello, am I audible? Oh. Okay. Is there anything called as management VLAN like a voice VLAN? Any VLAN can be configured as a management VLAN, correct? The same way, to keep unused ports as a safe ports, nobody accidentally can get connected to that port. Even if they got connected, no access to any of the network should happen. For that reason, we create a VLAN and we keep all of the unused interfaces of the switch on that particular VLAN, and we call that VLAN as a black hole VLAN. Is that clear? Okay. Now, the example what I have given you is, if I have a management VLAN, I wanted to have a management VLAN. Basically, all of the administrative people or management services will be running or will be connected to that particular VLAN. For example, on this switch, I have 2 members on the management VLAN. This VLAN number can be anything, like what, VLAN 10. VLAN 10 is reserved for management. Any interface which is part of the management VLAN could be having access according to the management VLAN's restriction. Am I right? Other than this, do we have any specific concept for management VLAN? Like VLAN number 10 will be management VLAN. Is that true? No. So what I mean to say, on your switch, it could be, you could have multiple switches. In any of the switches, if you have couple of unused ports, I'm going to be keeping as default. By default, all of the interfaces will be part of the default VLAN, which is 1. Right? And if anybody is going to be connecting to this particular port, they will be part of VLAN 1. Am I right or not? So to overcome this, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen. 1 minute, I'm just keep getting the calls. Right. So what I do is I'm just going to be keeping this interface into a specific VLAN called as 11. It could be any VLAN. I'm just keeping a VLAN called as VLAN number 11, and it has been reserved for keeping unused interfaces. Correct? What is the benefit of doing this? I can put a restriction that anybody connects to this particular port. I don't want anybody to be connected to an unused interface of a switch. Even if they got connected, they should not have access to any of the other VLANs. I call this type of VLAN as a black hole VLAN. What is the purpose of it? If that port is not being used, you should be blocking them. The same way, here I have IIS server, but I don't have a website. Instead of allowing that service running on a server, please stop it, because you don't have a web service. You don't need a web service. By doing that, unnecessary attacks towards unmonitored, unprotected application could be avoided. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. Who was asking that question? Like, I didn't understand this part. Oh, okay. Is that clear? Okay. Good. Then, to try to implement a firewall, whatever the technologies that you want. It could be from Checkpoint, it could be from Cisco, it could be from any vendor, according to your company's requirement, according to the current trend. Then you also try to go for implementing AAA. What is a AAA? Authentication, authorization, accounting. Authenticate anyone who is getting connected to the network, authorize them properly according to their role within the organization, and also start monitoring what they were doing on the organization after they have been authenticated and authorized. Like what? Authorization. If you belong to L1 admin, what set of authorizations you will be having it, right? So by accounting, by monitoring that activity, if an administrator who belongs to L1 team is trying to access some other service for which he don't have access to, by having this accounting, you will be in a position to question them why you were trying to access it. You understand? Or that can be considered as the proof of what he has done on the network. So same way, try to implement VPN wherever it is required, whereas wherever it is required, go for AAA. Wherever you need VPN, you can implement it. You can have various filtering technologies in place just to secure your infrastructure. Okay, so what we want it to secure. This is what security. So first thing towards securing your infrastructure is to secure it. After securing your infrastructure with the help of all the required technologies in place, can I keep silence? Nope. That's where the second stage comes into picture, which we call it as monitor. Complete monitoring your infrastructure, like NOC, what basically it does, SOC, basically what it does, the network operation, they are going to be continuously monitoring the activities of your application, network, or the whatever you have. It has to be completely monitored. What for? If any illegal or malicious things are happening, you should be in a position to identify even before it can start doing its damage. Right? So that's where the monitoring comes into picture. This is where we do something called as what? IDS. We will keep the IDS here. Right? Your NOC, your SOC, all of them are going to be part of your monitoring phase. Okay, I have secured my infrastructure. I'm also continuously monitoring my infrastructure. Is that okay? Is that enough? Nope. That's where the third phase comes into picture, which is called as evaluate phase. Like, you have your white hats. You remember? White hats. What they do? Penetration testing, vulnerability assessment. Over a period of time, we also need to do something called as a security audit. Basically, evaluation helps you to understand the current security level of your organization. Of course, the penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, security audit is going to be generating a report with a recommendation to improve your security. That is the fourth phase. So penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, security audit will evaluate your current security level Based on that, we can also come up with improvisation plan. So based on that, we will secure it. Once it is secured, we just need to monitor. After the monitoring, of course, we have to evaluate at a periodical interval, and then based on that, we will improve. This is going to be considered as a continuous process. Security is considered as continuous iterative process, right? By continuously doing this kind of activities, you will be able to secure your infrastructure. Now tell me where we are. Now the firewall is going to be part of the security phase, right? So this is where we are in. Of course, your IDS, IPS are all going to be here. So the IPS will be here, IDS will be here. Okay, so evaluation, people who are getting into this, what is it called, the CEH or LPT, whatever the certifications they are doing it. Okay, so this is what we are talking about from the perspective of this slide. See here, secure, monitor and respond, test, manage and improvise. So this is where the continuous security process comes into picture, and we call this as a SAFE architecture. SAFE. SAFE stands for what? Security architecture for enterprises. That's what SAFE stands for. There are so many architectures. The current popular architecture is what on data center? I think Sridhar, what is the architecture we follow in data center? Do we have Sridhar? I hope so. In data center? Okay. Then, okay. That's okay. That's okay. I'm just focusing only on the data center architecture, Sridhar. Data center, we call it as a spine leaf architecture, right? Is that 3-tier architecture? Is that 3-tier? Okay. Exactly. That's anyway, it's okay. So we know the architecture called spine leaf architecture, right? In enterprises, we also had something called as a popular architecture called AVID, AVIVD, right? Architecture for voice, video, and integrated data. That's another architecture. We had it, and then later we came up with SONA. SONA is nothing but service-oriented network architecture. Now, in currently data centers, we are working with spine leaf architecture. Forget about 3-tier or 2-tier. We don't need to discuss about it, but there is something called a spine leaf architecture. Okay. Further, if you want to have the discussion with respect to it, after the class we can have it. Sridhar, Ranita, okay? After 11 o'clock, if you want to sit, we can sit and discuss about it. That part. Okay, so any questions on SAFE, security architecture for enterprises? Okay, well and good. So that would be the end of your security fundamentals. Shall we have a short break and then we will start? Because it's theory, right? I just need to make sure that you are attentive by giving some short breaks. Now, if it is going to be lapsed, then we no need to worry about it. So just bear with me only for today, max to max today. I'll finish off all these fundamental theories now, so that when we get into the actual product, I'll try to get into the labs today itself. Let's try to do that one. If not, by tomorrow we can, for sure we will be getting into the labs only. When you are doing the labs, obviously you will be more attentive. But theory, we need to make sure that some regular breaks are given so that you can be fully involved inside the class. I believe this. If you don't want to have a break, we can continue it. I don't have any issues. If you allow me to talk, I'll talk the whole day. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, let the meeting be open. Okay, once 9:30. Shall we assemble by 9:45? Is that okay? I'm just going for a tea. That's all. Once you're back, just please message me over here on the chat so that I'll also be aware of it. Okay? Yeah, thank you.